The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was the largest structure ever built by living beings. It floated in the empty space between three star systems, a massive sphere of crystal and metal that could hold representatives from over 2,000 different species. The walls were made of a special glass that showed the stars outside, making everyone inside feel very small when they looked up at the endless darkness above them. On this day, the hall was full. Every seat was taken. Every delegation had sent their best diplomats and military leaders. The air was thick with tension, and the translation devices that everyone wore hummed quietly as they worked to convert thousands of alien languages into something each person could understand. Ambassador of the stood at the central platform, his tall body casting a long shadow across the polished floor. They were an old species, one of the founding members of the Galactic Council. They had scales that changed color with their emotions, and right now, scales were a deep, worried purple. "My fellow representatives," he said, his four arms spread wide in a gesture of openness. "I have called this emergency session because we face the greatest threat in the history of our alliance. The Dominion has begun its advance." A wave of whispers passed through the crowd. Some of the newer species did not know much about but the older ones, the species who had been traveling between stars for thousands of years, they knew. Their representatives grew very still, and their faces showed fear. Touched a control on his podium, and a massive holographic display appeared above him. It showed a map of the galaxy, with the territories of the Council marked in blue. At the edge of the map, a red stain was spreading. It moved slowly but steadily, swallowing system after system. "They have conquered the outer territories," continued. 17 species have fallen to them in the past cycle alone. Their fleet now numbers over 12,000 warships, and they are moving toward the inner systems, toward us. High Admiral of the rose from his seat. They were warriors, their bodies covered in natural armor that had evolved over millions of years of fighting on their harsh. Was old for his kind, his shell from countless battles, but his voice was still strong. "What are their demands?" he asked. "They have sometimes accepted tribute in the past. Perhaps we can negotiate." Scales flickered to a sickly yellow, the color of shame. "They have made no demands, Admiral. They have sent only one message, repeated on all frequencies." He touched another control, and a cold, mechanical voice filled the hall. "Inferior species. Resistance is inefficient. Submit to absorption. Your genetic material will serve the Dominion." The message ended and silence fell over the assembly. Absorption. Everyone knew what that meant. They did not simply conquer other species. They took them apart, piece by piece, studying their biology and their technology. Whatever they found useful, they kept. Whatever they did not need, they destroyed. Species that were absorbed by the simply stopped existing. "How long?" asked Sorrel, the representative of the. There were small creatures, covered in soft fur the color of autumn leaves. They were known throughout the galaxy as scientists and explorers, not fighters. Sorrel's voice trembled as he spoke. "How long until they reach us?" "At their current speed, approximately 6 standard rotations," answered. "Perhaps less if they increase their pace." 6 rotations. Less than 2 Earth months. It was not enough time to build a defense fleet. It was not enough time to develop new weapons. It was barely enough time to evacuate the most important populations to distant colonies where they might hide for a few more years. The delegation had already begun packing their ceremonial items. They were a peaceful species, devoted to art and philosophy. They had no military to speak of and had always relied on the Council for protection. Now, they understood that protection would not be enough. "We must retreat," said, his voice heavy with defeat. "Evacuate what we can. Preserve what knowledge we are able to save. Perhaps in some distant corner of the galaxy, some of our cultures will survive." Many heads nodded in agreement. It was a terrible choice, but what other option was there? They had destroyed civilizations far older and more powerful than the Galactic Council. They had weapons that could tear holes in the fabric of space. Their soldiers felt no fear and no pain. To fight them was to die. And then a voice spoke up from near the back of the hall. "Excuse me, but we disagree." Every eye in the chamber turned toward the source of the voice. The human delegation sat in a small section near the edge of the hall, a position that reflected their status as one of the members of the council. There were only 5 of them, a tiny group compared to the hundreds of representatives from older species. Captain Lisa Monroe stood at the front of the human group. She was not tall by galactic standards, and her body had no natural armor, no venomous spines, no extra limbs. By the standards of most species in the hall, she was almost comically fragile. And yet, she stood with her shoulders straight and her chin lifted, showing no fear at all. "The humans," said, and there was something almost like pity in his voice. "Captain Monroe, you have been members of our council for less than 30 of your years. You cannot possibly understand what we face. They have conquered species that were building starships when your kind was still living in caves." Lisa did not seem offended by this. If anything, her smile grew a little wider. "That's true, Ambassador. We're pretty new to this whole space thing, but we've been watching them for a while now, studying everything we could find about them, and we think we might have some ideas." A ripple of confused murmurs passed through the crowd. The translator devices struggled to convey the tone of the human's voice. She did not sound afraid. She did not sound desperate. She sounded almost casual, as if she were discussing a minor problem rather than the end of galactic civilization. Sorrel let out a sharp bark that his translator rendered as laughter. "Child, you do not understand what you are saying. My people had colonies on 100 worlds. They took them all in a single afternoon. They have weapons that can tear planets apart. What could your tiny species possibly do against such power?" Commander Jake, who stood beside Lisa, stepped forward. He was a broad man with dark hair and an easy grin that seemed out of place in the somber hall. "Well, for starters, we brought coffee." The translators buzzed with confusion. Coffee? What was coffee? Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos reached into her bag and pulled out a metal container. She opened it, and steam rose from the dark liquid inside. Several nearby aliens recoiled from the strong smell. "Human stimulant," Maria explained. "Helps us think better when things get stressful, and we've found that we do our best work under stress." Rose again, his armored body creaking. "This is not a joke, humans. This is the survival of everything we have built. If you have something meaningful to contribute, speak now. Otherwise, do not waste our time." Lisa's expression grew serious, though her eyes still held a spark of something that might have been confidence or might have been madness. It was hard for the alien observers to tell the difference. "Admiral, I apologize if we seem to be taking this lightly. We're not. We understand exactly how serious this situation is." She stepped forward, moving toward the central platform. The guards who usually stopped non-speakers from approaching did not move to stop her. They were too surprised. "The truth is, we've been preparing for something like this ever since we joined the Council. We studied them obsessively. We analyzed every battle they've fought, every species they've conquered, every piece of technology they've ever used, and we found something interesting." She reached the central platform and touched the holographic controls. The display changed, showing a detailed breakdown of fleet movements over the past century. "They are efficient," Lisa said. "That's their greatest strength. They approach warfare like a math problem. Maximum force, minimum waste, optimal pathways. Every decision they make is calculated to produce the best possible result with the least expenditure of resources. It's made them nearly unbeatable against conventional tactics." Leaned forward, his interest caught despite his skepticism. "This is not new information. We have all studied tactics. Their efficiency is precisely why they cannot be defeated." "But that's just it," Lisa said. "Efficiency is their strength, but it's also their weakness. Because efficiency requires predictability. It requires knowing what your enemy will do and planning the perfect response. They've gotten so used to winning that they've become rigid. They follow protocols. They expect certain behaviors from their enemies, and they've optimized their responses to those behaviors. She zoomed in on a particular battle in the holographic display. It showed a fleet engaging a much smaller defensive force. The defenders fought bravely, forming tight formations and concentrating their fire as military doctrine suggested. The fleet moved with mechanical precision, surrounding the defenders and destroying them in minutes. "See this," Lisa pointed at the display. "The defense fleet at the Battle of, they followed standard military doctrine perfectly. Their formations were textbook, their firing patterns optimal, and they crushed them in less than an hour." Sorrel made a sound of pain. "I lost family at, what is your point, human?" "My point is that they knew exactly what they would do. They had modeled it, planned for it, optimized their response. They never had a chance because they did exactly what they expected them to do." Lisa changed the display again, showing another battle. This one was older, from before the Council had detailed records. The human had clearly spent a long time digging through ancient archives. "But look at this. The Battle of Nexus Prime about 300 years ago, a species called the. They were losing badly, their fleet nearly destroyed, but then something strange happened." The display showed the ships suddenly breaking formation. Instead of retreating in an orderly manner as expected, they scattered in random directions. Some accelerated toward the fleet, some fled sideways, some actually reversed course and flew back through the enemy formation. "The commander panicked," Lisa explained. "He gave orders that made no tactical sense. His fleet fell apart into chaos, and look at what happened to the response." The fleet in the display seemed to hesitate. Ships that had been moving in perfect coordination suddenly slowed. Some stopped entirely. For several seconds, the efficient machine of the military simply froze. "They didn't know what to do," Lisa said. "Their protocols didn't have a response for complete chaos. It took them almost 4 full seconds to adapt, to issue new orders, to resume their attack." "4 seconds," said slowly, "and the use this pause to escape." Lisa's smile faded. "No. The commander was court-martialed after the battle for incompetence. His government was so embarrassed by his disorderly retreat that they stripped him of rank and imprisoned him. And then, 3 months later, they came back and conquered the completely. But that's not the point." She turned to face the assembled representatives. "The point is that they have a weakness. It's small and it's brief, but it's real. When faced with something they don't expect, something that doesn't fit their models, they freeze, just for a few seconds. But in battle, a few seconds can be everything." Scales had shifted from purple to a thoughtful green. "What are you suggesting, Captain Monroe? That we adopt disorderly tactics? That we throw away military discipline and hope that chaos will save us?" "Not hope," Lisa said. "Plan. We don't just create chaos. We weaponize it. We hit them with so many unexpected variables, so many things that don't fit their protocols, that their entire command structure locks up. And then, while they're trying to figure out what's happening, we strike with everything we have." The hall was silent for a long moment. Then High Admiral spoke again. "You speak of theory, human, but theories do not win wars. What specific actions do you propose?" Lisa nodded. "I propose a meeting, right now, with whatever military leaders are willing to listen. I have plans, Admiral, detailed plans, but they require cooperation and they require trust. Most importantly, they require a willingness to do things that no galactic military has ever tried before." She looked around the hall, meeting as many eyes as she could. "I know we're new here. I know we don't have the history or the experience of most of your species, but where we come from, we have a saying. It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog." The translator struggled with this idiom, producing various confused interpretations for different species. But the meaning came through clearly enough. Humans are small, Lisa continued. We have no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities. Everything we have, we built with our minds and our hands. We survived by being adaptable, by refusing to give up, by finding ways to beat enemies that should have destroyed us. Predators with fangs and claws, diseases that killed millions, natural disasters that reshaped our world and each other. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. We are here because our ancestors never stopped fighting. They never accepted that something was impossible just because it seemed impossible. They looked at every obstacle as a problem to be solved, and they kept trying new things until they found solutions. She pointed at the red stain on the galactic map, the advancing fleet. That is a problem, a big one, but it is still just a problem, and humans are very, very good at solving problems. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. It was not the silence of despair, but the silence of thought. Representatives were looking at each other, some with doubt, some with curiosity, and some with the faintest glimmer of something they had almost forgotten. Hope. High Admiral rose from his seat and walked down to the central platform. He was much taller than Lisa, his armored body looming over her like a walking fortress. But when he spoke, his voice was respectful. I have fought many battles, human. I have seen courage and I have seen foolishness. Often, they look very similar. Tell me, why should we trust the word of a species so young? What makes you believe you can succeed where so many others have failed? Lisa looked up at him without flinching. Because we've done it before, Admiral. Maybe not on this scale, but the principle is the same. Throughout our history, we've faced enemies that seemed unbeatable, empires that stretched across continents, plagues that killed half our population, weapons that could destroy entire cities in a single flash, and every time we found a way. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device. It projected a holographic image of Earth, the blue and green planet that was humanity's home. This is where we come from. It's a small world by galactic standards. We've only had space travel for a few hundred years. But in that time, we've gone from launching primitive rockets to building ships that can travel between stars. We did that because we never stopped pushing, never stopped believing that tomorrow could be better than today. Studied the image of Earth. Then he looked at Lisa, and for the first time, something shifted in his ancient eyes. You truly believe you can help us defeat the... I believe we can give us a fighting chance, Lisa said. I won't promise victory. No honest person could. But I can promise that if you work with us, if you're willing to try something new, that we'll face a battle unlike anything they've ever experienced. And that might be enough. Was silent for a long moment. The entire hall watched him, waiting. There were the greatest warriors in the council. If supported the humans, others would follow. If he rejected them, the moment of hope would die. Finally, the old admiral made a decision. I will hear your plans, human. I make no promises, but I will listen. He turned to address the rest of the council. If any other military leaders wish to join us, we will convene in the tactical chamber in 1 hour. The humans will present their strategy, and we will judge whether it has merit. He looked back at Lisa. I hope for all our sakes that your confidence is not misplaced. Lisa smiled. So do I, Admiral, so do I. 1 hour later, the tactical chamber was full. Word had spread quickly through the council station, and representatives from dozens of species had come to hear what the humans had to say. Most of them expected to witness a failure, a young species embarrassing itself by pretending to have answers that older and wiser civilizations had not found. But they came anyway, because the alternative was returning to their quarters to pack for evacuation. Lisa stood at the center of the room, surrounded by holographic displays. Jake and Maria flanked her, along with 2 other members of the human delegation, Lieutenant Danny Park, their tactical specialist, and Ensign Martinez, who had spent the past 3 years studying technology. Thank you all for coming, Lisa began. I know many of you are skeptical, you should be. We're asking you to take a huge risk based on the word of a species you barely know. But please hear us out. If you still think we're wrong when we're done, you can go back to planning your evacuation. We won't stop you." She activated the main display, showing the fleet as it currently existed. 12,000 ships, arranged in a perfect formation that stretched across light years of space. They operate on a hierarchical command structure, Lisa explained. Their flagship, the Eternal Dominion, issues orders to sector commanders, who relay them to squadron leaders, who direct individual ships. It's efficient, but it's also centralized. Take out the flagship and you create chaos throughout the entire fleet. Shook his head. "This is not a new idea, Captain. Many have tried to target command ships. They are the most heavily protected vessels in their fleet. Getting close enough to attack is nearly impossible." "You're right," Lisa said. "Under normal circumstances, attacking the flagship directly would be suicide, but we're not proposing normal circumstances." She changed the display, showing a detailed tactical map of the Andromeda Corridor, the region of space where the fleet was currently traveling. They will pass through this corridor in approximately 4 days. The corridor is narrow by galactic standards, only about 2 light-years across at its widest point. It's filled with asteroid fields, nebulae, and other natural obstacles that limit sensor range and maneuverability. Sorrel leaned forward. "You propose to ambush them there." "Not exactly. An ambush implies hiding and striking from surprise. What we're proposing is more like controlled chaos." Lisa grinned. "We're going to make them think they're facing a much larger fleet than we actually have. Then we're going to hit them with so many unexpected tactics that their command structure can't keep up. And while they're trying to figure out what's happening, a small strike team will board the flagship and destroy it from the inside." The room erupted in objections. Representatives from a dozen species spoke at once, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of doubt and disbelief. "Board the flagship, that's insane. They have never been defeated in close combat. Their soldiers are engineered for killing. How would you even get a boarding team close enough? Their defenses would destroy any shuttle before it reached the hull." Lisa raised her hand and gradually the noise died down. "I know it sounds crazy. Honestly, it is crazy. But that's exactly why it might work. They don't expect it. They've never had to defend against a boarding action because no one has ever been brave enough or stupid enough to try. Their internal security protocols are minimal compared to their external defenses." She nodded to who stepped forward with a tablet in her hands. "Ensign Martinez has spent years studying captured technology. Tell them what you found." Was young, barely 25 by Earth years, but her voice was steady and confident. They designed their ships for efficiency, not internal defense. They assume that any threat will come from outside, from enemy weapons fire or missiles. Inside the ship, they rely on their soldiers to handle any problems, but those soldiers are spread thin because they're also used for planetary assault. She pulled up a schematic of a warship. If a small team could get inside, they could reach the engine core in less than 20 minutes. The corridors are designed in a hub-and-spoke pattern, which actually makes navigation easier once you know the layout. Plant the right explosives in the right places, and the whole ship goes up. Study the schematic. And how do you propose to get this small team inside? The shields alone would vaporize any shuttle. "We don't use shuttles," Jake said, speaking for the first time. "We use something smaller, something the sensors aren't calibrated to detect." He pulled up another display, showing a compact, dark shape that looked almost organic. "We call them drop pods. They're about the size of a human body, made from materials that absorb sensor radiation. During the Battle of Earth's Moon, back when we were still fighting each other, one of our nations used similar technology to insert special forces behind enemy lines. The pods are launched during the height of battle, when sensors are overwhelmed with data. By the time anyone notices them, the troops are already inside." "You have experience with this tactic?" asked Jake's grin widened. "Admiral, humans have been sneaking into enemy territory since before we invented writing. It's kind of our specialty." The Admiral was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then he turned to who had been listening from the back of the room. "Ambassador, what is your assessment? You have studied the humans longer than most." Scales shifted through several colors before settling on a thoughtful blue. "The humans are unusual. When they first made contact with the Council, many of us dismissed them as primitives. Their technology was crude by our standards, they're short, their bodies fragile. But in the years since, they have surprised us repeatedly." He moved closer to the displays, examining the tactical plans with his four-eyed gaze. "Their scientists have proposed theories that challenged our understanding of physics. Their engineers have found solutions to problems we considered unsolvable. And their artists have created works that moved even the most jaded of our cultural critics." He turned to face the room. "I do not know if this plan will work, but I know that underestimating humans has proven unwise in the past. They have a quality that is difficult to translate into our languages. The closest term might be stubbornness, but that does not capture the full meaning. They simply refuse to accept defeat, even when defeat seems certain." Nodded slowly. "Very well, Captain Monroe, please continue. Explain the full plan in detail. If it has merit, that will support you. If not, we will know soon enough." Lisa took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been preparing for since she first learned about the threat. The next few hours would determine the fate of galactic civilization. "The plan has 4 phases," she began. "Phase 1 is deception. Phase 2 is disruption. Phase 3 is destruction. And Phase 4 is what we call the Hail Mary." She saw confused expressions at the last term and quickly explained. "A Hail Mary is a desperate last-chance attempt. We're hoping we won't need it, but we're preparing for it anyway. That's another human specialty. We always have a backup plan." For the next 3 hours, Lisa and her team outlined every detail of their strategy. They explained the decoy technology that would make their small fleet appear 10 times larger. They described the electronic warfare platforms that they could build to jam communications. They detailed the unconventional tactics they would use to confuse enemy sensors and disrupt their perfect formations. And they explained the boarding action, step by step, from the moment the drop pods launched to the moment the flagship exploded. When they finished, the room was silent. Representatives looked at each other, trying to gauge reactions, trying to decide what they believed. Finally stood. "I have heard many battle plans in my long life. Some were brilliant, most were adequate, a few were disastrous. This plan is different." He walked to the main display and studied it for a long moment. "It relies on assumptions about behavior that we cannot verify. It requires technology that has never been tested in combat. It depends on a level of coordination between species that has never been achieved. And it asks soldiers to attempt things that every military doctrine says are impossible." He turned to face Lisa. "It is exactly the kind of plan that should fail." Lisa met his gaze steadily. "But—" The old admiral's face twisted into what might have been a smile. It was hard to tell. "But it is also the kind of plan that they will never expect, and that, more than anything else, is what gives it a chance of success." He raised his voice so everyone in the room could hear. "I am High Admiral of the fleet. I have served my people for over 200 years. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched species that were ancient when my kind was young disappear into the darkness of history. And I have never, in all that time, been more afraid than I am at this moment." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. "But I have also never seen such courage. These humans, these young, fragile, short-lived creatures, have come before us with a plan that most of our own strategists would call madness. They have offered to risk their lives leading an assault that has almost no chance of success. And they have done so not because they are too stupid to understand the danger, but because they believe it is the right thing to do. He drew himself up to his full height, his armor glinting in the light. "The will fight. We will follow the human plan. And if we die, we will die as warriors, not as refugees fleeing into the endless dark." One by one, other representatives stood. They pledged their electronic warfare technology. They offered their medical ships and support vessels. Even the peaceful scientists who had never fought in a war volunteered to help however they could. Lisa watched as the coalition came together, feeling a mix of pride and terror. They were really going to do this. They were going to fight the... She turned to Jake, who was standing beside her with an unreadable expression. "Any regrets?" she asked quietly. He shrugged. "Ask me again in a week. Either we'll be heroes or we'll be dead. Either way, it should be interesting." Maria joined them, her tablet still in her hands. They say they can have the jamming platforms ready in 3 days. They are mobilizing their heavy cruisers, and I've got about 1,000 messages from human ships volunteering for the assault. Lisa nodded. "Tell them all the same thing. Get ready, rest while you can, and make peace with whatever god or philosophy you believe in." She looked up at the holographic display, at the red stain that represented the fleet moving ever closer to the heart of civilization. "Because in 4 days, we're going to war." The next 3 days were a blur of activity. Ships arrived from across Council space, forming the largest fleet ever assembled under a unified command. Human vessels, small and fast, took up positions alongside the massive warships and the elegant cruisers. Science vessels modified their sensor arrays for electronic warfare. Medical frigates stocked up on supplies for casualties that everyone hoped would not come. Lisa barely slept. There was too much to do, too many details to coordinate, too many worried representatives to reassure. She moved from meeting to meeting, from ship to ship, spreading confidence that she did not entirely feel. On the morning of the 4th day, she stood on the bridge of the Resolute, humanity's most advanced battleship. It was not the largest ship in the fleet, not even close. The flagship was 10 times its size, but it was fast, maneuverable, and equipped with technology that the humans had kept secret until now. "Status report," she called out. Danny Park looked up from his console. "All ships are in position. The decoys are deployed and broadcasting fake signatures. The jamming platforms are powered up and ready, and the boarding teams are standing by in the shuttle bays." Lisa nodded. "What about the..." "They'll exit hyperspace in approximately 2 hours, right on schedule." 2 hours. In 2 hours, they would face the most dangerous military force in the galaxy. In 2 hours, everything they had worked for would be put to the test. Lisa felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to find Jake standing beside her. He had changed into his combat gear, the lightweight armor that human Marines wore for boarding actions. A weapon hung at his hip, and more were strapped to his body in various places. "The teams are ready," he said. 40 drop pods, 2 soldiers each. We've trained for this scenario 100 times in the simulators." "Simulators aren't real," Lisa said quietly. "No, but they're the best we've got." He squeezed her shoulder. "Hey, we knew the odds when we signed up for this. Every person on those drop pods volunteered. They know what they're getting into." Lisa took a deep breath. "I know, I just wish there was another way." "There isn't. If there was, you would have found it." Jake smiled. "That's why they picked you to lead this thing. Not because you're the bravest or the strongest, but because you're the one who never stops looking for solutions. You'll find a way to get us through this. I believe that." Before Lisa could respond, Maria's voice came over the intercom. "Captain, we're getting a transmission from Admiral." "Put it through." The main flickered and the Admiral's face appeared. He looked tired, which was unusual for a species that needed very little sleep, but his eyes were sharp and focused. "Captain Monroe, my fleet is in position. We await your command." Lisa straightened her shoulders. "Thank you, Admiral. Remember the plan. When they exit hyperspace, we let them see the decoys first, make them think we have a massive fleet waiting for them. When they spread out to address the perceived threat, we hit them with the jammers. And then the chaos begins, finished. Exactly. In the confusion, the drop pods launch. Once the boarding team is inside the flagship, we concentrate all fire on their escort vessels. Keep them busy, give Jake's team time to reach the engine core. Nodded slowly. It is a good plan, human, unconventional but good. I hope it works. So do I, Admiral, so do I. The screen went dark and Lisa turned back to the viewport. Outside, the stars seemed peaceful, uncaring. They had witnessed the birth and death of countless civilizations. Whatever happened today, they would continue to shine. Captain, Danny said, his voice suddenly tense. Hyperspace distortions detected. They are coming. Lisa gripped the arm of her command chair. All hands, battle stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Throughout the ship, alarms blared. Crew members rushed to their posts. Weapons systems powered up. Shields came online. The Resolute, like every other ship in the fleet, prepared for the fight of its life. And then, across the entire width of the corridor, space itself seemed to tear open. The fleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of insects from a burning nest. 12,000 ships, their dark hulls absorbing the light of distant stars. They moved in perfect formation, each vessel exactly where it should be, executing a coordinated dance of death. At the center of the formation, the Eternal Dominion led the way. It was massive, larger than some space stations, bristling with weapons that could reduce planets to rubble. This was the heart of the military, the brain that controlled their entire operation. "They're scanning us," Danny reported, "trying to get a read on our fleet's strength." "Let them see the decoys," Lisa ordered. "Make them believe." Across the corridor, 300 modified cargo containers broadcast energy signatures that mimicked full-sized warships. To sensors, it appeared that the Council fleet was 10 times its actual size. For a long moment, nothing happened. The fleet continued its advance, apparently unconcerned. Lisa's heart sank. Had the deception failed? Then the formation began to shift. Ships spread out, moving to cover more space, preparing to engage what they thought was a massive enemy force. "It's working," Maria breathed. "They're taking the bait." Lisa allowed herself a small smile. Phase 1 complete. Signal the begin jamming. Deep within the asteroid field, the hidden platforms activated. Waves of electronic interference swept across the battlefield, disrupting communications on every frequency. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Ships that had been moving in perfect coordination suddenly veered off course. Some accelerated when they should have slowed. Others turned in the wrong direction. The beautiful precision of their formation dissolved into scattered clusters of confused vessels. "4 seconds," Lisa muttered, watching the chaos unfold. "Come on, come on." The commanders were faster than she had hoped. Within 3 seconds, backup communication protocols activated. Ships began to regain their coordination. The window was closing. But it was enough. "All ships weapons free," Lisa broadcast. "Show them what chaos really looks like." From the debris field on the far side of the corridor, human ships that had been drifting as dead hulks suddenly roared to life. Their engines flared brilliant blue as they accelerated to attack speed, targeting the still disorganized squadrons. The Resolute shook as she fired her main batteries, sending streams of energy into the nearest enemy vessel. The ship's shields flared and held, but the attack forced it to take evasive action, breaking it further from its squadron. All around them, battle was joined. Ships wheeled and fired, filling the void with the light of weapons and explosions. Human vessels darted between the larger combatants, striking and retreating before the enemy could respond. Warships plowed forward in tight formations, their heavy weapons tearing into hulls. Cruisers hung back, continuing their electronic assault while their allies did the close fighting. And in the middle of it all, 40 drop pods launched from the belly of the Resolute, streaking toward the Eternal Dominion. "Drop pods away," Maria reported. "Jake's team is en route to the target." Lisa watched the tiny dots on her tactical display, so small they were almost invisible against the massive scale of the battle. Everything depended on those pods reaching their destination. Everything depended on 80 soldiers doing the impossible. "Good luck," she whispered. "Good luck, Jake." Inside Drop Pod 7, Commander Jake felt the crushing acceleration press him into his seat. Beside him, Sergeant Amy checked her weapons for the dozenth time, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. 30 seconds to contact," said the automated voice of the pod's computer. Jake looked at the small display that showed their trajectory. They were threading through the crossfire, dodging between ships and weapons fire, heading straight for the largest vessel in the enemy fleet. "You know," Amy said, her voice surprisingly calm, "when I signed up for the Marines, I was hoping to do something exciting. This might be a bit more exciting than I planned." Jake laughed despite the tension. "At least it's not boring." 20 seconds. Through the tiny viewport, Jake could see the Eternal Dominion growing larger. Its hull was covered in strange patterns that seemed to shift and move, as if the ship itself were alive. Weapons platforms dotted its surface like spines on some ancient sea creature. 10 seconds. Brace for impact. Jake gripped his restraints and closed his eyes. This was the moment of truth. Either the pod would breach the hull and they would be inside the enemy flagship, or they would be detected and destroyed in an instant. There was a tremendous crash, a screech of tearing metal, and then silence. Jake opened his eyes. They were inside. The pod had punched through an external maintenance hatch, designed for robots rather than living beings. The hole was tight, but passable. Emergency lights flickered in the corridor beyond, casting everything in shades of red. "We're in," Jake reported over his communicator. "All pods report status." One by one, the responses came. Most of the pods had made it. A few had been destroyed in the chaos of battle, their occupants lost before they could even begin the mission. But enough had survived. They had soldiers inside the enemy flagship. "All teams converge on the engine core. Watch for enemy contacts and keep moving. We don't have much time." Jake drew his weapon and moved into the corridor, Amy right behind him. The interior of the ship was strange, organic-looking despite being made of metal and composite materials. The walls curved and twisted in ways that seemed designed for bodies very different from human ones. But had been right about the layout. The hub-and-spoke design made navigation relatively simple. They were heading for the center of the ship, where the power systems were located. "Contact ahead," Amy whispered. Jake saw them too. 3 soldiers, their bodies covered in the same dark material as their ships. They were tall, with too many joints and limbs that bent in unnatural directions. They turned toward the humans, weapons rising. Jake and Amy opened fire together. The fight was brief and brutal. Soldiers were tough, engineered for combat, but they were not prepared for the intensity of human close-quarters tactics. Jake and Amy moved together, covering each other, their weapons never stopping. When it was over, 3 bodies lay on the floor and Jake was breathing hard. "Keep moving," he said, "more will come." They advanced through the ship, encountering resistance at every junction, but word was spreading among the boarding teams. They had discovered something useful. They were vulnerable to sonic frequencies in the 18 kilohertz range. The humans adjusted their equipment, and suddenly their enemies became disoriented and slow. The engine room was ahead. Jake could see the doors, massive slabs of dark metal that seemed to pulse with inner light. "All teams converge on my position. We breach on my mark." Acknowledgments came from around the ship. 30 soldiers had survived the journey, forming up around the entrance to this power core. Jake looked at Amy, ready. She smiled grimly. Let's finish this. Mark! The doors exploded inward, and the humans poured through. The engine room was vast, dominated by a pulsing sphere of energy that hurt to look at directly. Technicians scrambled to escape as the soldiers advanced, their weapons cutting down anyone who tried to fight back. At the center of the room, between the humans and their objective, stood a single massive figure. The commander was twice the size of the soldiers they had faced, its body covered in ceremonial armor that seemed to absorb light itself. When it spoke, the translation came through as a rumble of pure contempt. Insects, you dare invade the heart of the Dominion. Jake raised his weapon. Yeah, well, exterminator wasn't my first career choice, but here we are. The commander lunged with speed that seemed impossible for its size. Jake dove to the side, rolling and coming up firing. The shots sparked off the creature's armor but did little damage. Amy, the gravity grenades. Sergeant pulled the devices from her belt and threw them at the commander's feet. Localized gravitational fields, each one set to maximum intensity, pinned the massive alien to the deck. It struggled, armor groaning under the strain but couldn't break free. Now, Jake shouted. The remaining soldiers opened fire on the energy core. The containment fields flickered, then failed. Warning alarms blared throughout the ship. Time to go, Jake announced. Everyone to the extraction point, move. They ran, the sounds of the dying flagship echoing behind them. On the bridge of the Resolute, Lisa watched as the Eternal Dominion exploded in a flash of light visible across half the system. Secondary explosions rippled through the fleet as their networked command systems collapsed, leaving individual ships directionless and vulnerable. They're retreating, Danny reported, disbelief coloring his voice. The remaining ships are withdrawing to hyperspace. Exhausted cheers erupted from the crew. They had done it. They had actually done it. But Lisa's eyes were fixed on the tactical display, searching for the signals of the escape pods that should have launched from the flagship before it exploded. Come on, she whispered. Come on, Jake. Minutes passed. The fleet continued to retreat, their perfect formation shattered. Around the Resolute, the remnants of the Allied fleet began to regroup, battered but victorious. And then a signal appeared on the display. Escape pod detected, Maria reported, her voice tight with emotion. One pod bearing 31 Mark 7. Life signs are stable. Lisa felt tears prick her eyes. Get a shuttle out there, now. An hour later, she stood in the shuttle bay as the battered escape pod was towed aboard. The hatch opened, and Jake emerged, supported by Amy on one side and two other Marines on the other. He looked terrible. Burns, cuts, and bruises covered every visible inch of skin. His armor was scorched and torn, but he was smiling. Hey, Captain, he said, did I miss anything? Lisa wanted to laugh. She wanted to cry. Instead, she walked forward and pulled him into a careful hug. You did good, Jake. You did really good. He patted her back weakly. Just doing my job, so did we win. Lisa stepped back and smiled through her tears. Yeah, we won. Behind her, the crew of the Resolute began to cheer again. The sound echoed through the bay, through the ship, and somehow it felt like it echoed across the entire galaxy. They had won. The Dominion, for the first time in their history, had been defeated. And the humans were just getting started. In the days that followed, news of the battle spread across civilized space at the speed of light. Species who had resigned themselves to eventual absorption by the suddenly found themselves reconsidering. Hope, that fragile thing that had seemed so lost, began to take root once more. The Galactic Council convened in full session for the first time since the crisis began, but the tone was different now. Where there had been despair, there was wonder. Where there had been fear, there was the beginning of courage. Ambassador stood at the central platform. his scales shimmering with colors that represented joy and gratitude, and a dozen other emotions that his species could express, but most could not name. "We have witnessed something unprecedented," he said. "A species barely 30 years into their membership in our community has accomplished what we believed impossible. When the darkness came, they did not run. They said, 'Relax, we've got this.'" A ripple of laughter passed through the chamber, breaking the tension that had gripped them for so long. "And they did," continued. "But more than that, they showed us something about ourselves. For too long, we have accepted our place in the galactic order. We have assumed that might equals right, that power cannot be challenged. The humans have reminded us that courage, creativity, and determination can overcome even the greatest odds." He turned to face the human delegation. Lisa stood at the front, still tired from the battle but standing tall. Her crew flanked her, the survivors of an impossible mission. "On behalf of the Galactic Council, I formally request that the human delegation be elevated to permanent advisory status on all matters of defense. Let us learn from their example. Let us remember what it means to fight for what we believe in." The chamber erupted in approval, representatives from dozens of species standing to show their support. Lisa stepped forward to acknowledge the honor. She looked around the room at the faces of beings from 1,000 different worlds, united in this moment by the victory they had achieved together. "Thank you," she said simply. "But we didn't do this alone. We did it together. Humans and every other species that stood with us. That's how we'll keep winning. Not as separate peoples fighting separate battles, but as one galaxy facing our challenges as one." She smiled, and for the first time since the crisis began, it was a smile without fear. "They will be back. Other threats will come. The universe doesn't care about our hopes or our dreams. But as long as we stand together, as long as we refuse to give up, we'll find a way. That's what humans believe. And today, I hope that's what all of us can believe." She raised her hand in a gesture of farewell. "Relax, everyone. We've got this." And somehow, standing together in that great hall between the stars, they believed her. The galaxy would never be the same. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all.